Thank you all very much. And it is a real pleasure and honor to be up here to introduce Judge Vance Day. The things that many people look at when they look at a resume, they look at he's a magna cum laude graduate of Warner Pacific University, 1984. Then studied and got a master's of biblical historiography at the Institute of Holy Land Studies in Jerusalem, then went to Regent University's Master of Public Policy program, got his Doctor of Jurisprudence in 1991, and then became a very successful litigator, litigating more than 300 bench and jury trials in his 20 years of practice. But I see him more as a Renaissance man. Among all those things that he accomplished just in his academic career. Early on, he worked in the communications industry in Taiwan and later in the Middle East. While as a lawyer, he lectured on military history and leadership theory at the White House, before members of Congress, the Heritage Foundation, the United States Military Academy at West Point, and various other military bases and educational institutions throughout the United States and Europe. His legal career took a turn in 2011 when the then Democrat governor of Oregon appointed him to the state court bench in Salem, which is, of course, the state capital of Oregon. A year later, he won election in that county for a full 6-year term. He has really distinguished himself as a member of the bench by establishing a veterans treatment court in his community that he leads, which has been very successful in assisting veterans in the criminal justice system to obtain assistance, benefits, and reducing the overall cost of their experience with the criminal justice system to society, and helping them in their rehabilitation. Now, that's probably enough, all of that, to have him speak before you today, but that's not the reason. Oregon seems to have become a hotbed of political correctness and has revealing the dark underside of intolerance in our society. This intolerance, as you will hear, is directed at people of faith because Oregon, as of course now all states, recognizes same-sex marriage, and there was an Oregon baker that was assessed a $135,000 fine, went out of business because they were not willing to prepare a wedding cake for a same-sex couple because it violated their religious faith. Well, public employees do not lose their First Amendment protected rights of free speech, free association, and religious liberty when they join the bench. And Judge Day is unfortunately an example of the persecution of people of faith that is spreading throughout our nation. It is a tragic story that is still not completed, and I'm proud to be a member of his legal team. Judge Day.
Thank you, Jim. My name is Vance Day, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak before you this morning. I serve as a circuit court judge in the county of Marion in the great state of Oregon. And as a circuit court judge, we're in charge of a variety of different cases, complex civil cases, domestic violence cases, family cases, felonies, misdemeanors, all the way up through constitutional cases, and of course, even capital murder. I'm not here, though, as a judge, nor do I represent the state of Oregon. I'm here as a private citizen addressing a group of community leaders regarding, frankly, an oppressive force facing the generation of Americans that we encompass. My story came to the attention of the nation this past September When the media reported that an Oregon judge was charged with ethics violations because he had recused himself from performing same-sex marriages based upon his Christian faith. Now, there are many duties that a circuit court judge has to attend to in Oregon, but one of them is not performing weddings. In Oregon, a judge may perform a wedding, but they are not required to do so. The alleged ethics violations went beyond same-sex marriage, though. They attacked me because I had exhibited my patriotism, how I expressed myself, and who I should associate with, and when I should associate with those people. They struck at my liberty. In doing so, they sought to establish bureaucratic preeminence over judicial independence. I have to tell you, the assault was aggressive, it was demeaning, and frankly hell-bent on assassinating my reputation. Those who sought my downfall wanted a public shaming so intense that no other judge would ever express a political or religious perspective contrary to the political correct elites in position of power. The personal assault was nearly overwhelming. We are just in the first part of really what is a multi-stage litigation, and my legal fees and expenses are already over $350,000. So is it really okay in America today to bankrupt a public official who silently and respectfully chose not to participate in same-sex marriage? Is it really okay to drag a duly elected judge through months of litigation and a 2-week hearing simply because he acted as a good Samaritan and sought to help a veteran in need? Is it okay to disparage his reputation because he hung patriotic wall hangings at a courthouse in an attempt to honor those who sacrificed their lives that we might live in freedom? Some of those who oppose my expression of liberty once sought tolerance for their own perspective, tolerance that was given. Now that the Supreme Court has decreed that the definition of marriage is changed, the request for tolerance from those who hold to natural marriage are met with immediate denial and a demand for compliance, utter compliance. And my story doesn't begin in 2014 when these alleged ethics violations came to the forefront. And frankly, my story doesn't begin in 1960 as the second child of 3 born to Doug and Janet Day. My American story began in 1623 as the sailing ship Anne departed from England and made its way to Plymouth Colony bearing my ancestors, Ralph and Joyce Wallen. It is a story that depicts a harsh and difficult life born out of an intense desire for liberty, that God-given, inalienable right to pursue one's destiny. My ancestors carved out a living in the wilderness of the East Coast and helped to birth this nation by farming the land and creating communities, serving in the Continental Army to win their independence, and eventually preserving it during the War of 1812. The authors of my family's story fought for the blue and for the gray. They fought in the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Each generation did its part to preserve, in some cases, and even sought to reestablish the liberty which our nation was founded. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are initiated among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, to this end, the founding generation agreed with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence to mutually pledge to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Looking back, I see an unfinished tapestry, frankly, of immense beauty, made up of generational sacrifice in the cause of liberty. Some strands bearing the scarlet hue resulting from lives lost in pursuit of establishing and maintaining our republic. Some saw it in the distance, but never fully tasted its reality. Others paid for it with their lives, their property, and their sacred honor. Some enjoyed it as a precious gift passed down to them for safekeeping. Others squandered their liberty and the legacy they inherited without recognizing the price that was paid to secure it. Even if your bloodline does not stretch back to the American founding, we are all recipients of this immense and costly gift called liberty. Until recently, a majority of Americans recognized that our liberties did not find their genesis in the largesse of government, but rather our liberties come from our Creator. Consider the words of Thomas Jefferson. Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are a gift of God? They are not to be violated, but with his wrath. Or ponder Benjamin Franklin's perspective that freedom is not a gift bestowed upon us by other men, but a right that belongs to us by the laws of God and nature. Yet in today's politically correct environment, both Jefferson and Franklin would be run out of town on a rail for daring to utter such statements. As a well-known columnist observed last week, the fierce determination to enforce political correctness, quote, has totalitarian roots, unquote. Writing in the Wall Street Journal, Dan Henniger observed that it comes from a, quote, kind of Americanized Maoism, unquote. He goes on to note that the left goes nuts when anyone suggests political correctness has totalitarian roots. But the PC game has always been, we win, you lose, get over it, comply. But people don't get over it, he continues, and they never forget. For a lot of voters now, possibly a majority, their experience with enforceable politically correct behavior, speech, and thought have bred a broad mistrust of elites. I believe that at its core, the politically correct movement is built upon a postmodern worldview. That worldview holds that meaning is not inherent in anything, that there are no absolute truths, and that every person's perception of reality is equally valid. This postmodern perspective stands in stark contrast to the Judeo-Christian worldview upon which our rights, our nation, and ultimately the concept of law is based. Absolute truth does exist, a truth which can be known, applied at all times, to all people, and at all places, and which is not subject to the majority or the dictates of any human government. The foundations of the Judeo-Christian worldview are found in God. Now, the great irony is that those who condemned McCarthyism in the 1950s now practice the same tactics they condemned then as a matter of routine. Rabbi R.A. Sparrow made exactly that point. Rabbi Sparrow, writing in the October 31st edition of Human Events, saw it clearly, quote, "The phrase politically correct falls short of describing what is actually liberal McCarthyism, an ideological position using brutal tools and tactics to silence the American majority. By controlling speech, they control our spheres of life. A civil war has already begun in this country. The weapons of choice by those who wish to conquer this country are intimidation, suppression of speech, demonization, loss of livelihood, the legal system, and the classroom." He goes on, "The battle against this cultural and religious cleansing has been launched. We need to exhibit unceasing defiance against the petty bureaucratic overlords who tell us what we can and what we cannot say or do. Over the past few months, I've been called a bigot, a homophobe, a religious zealot, among many other things, all in an attempt to disenfranchise me from expressing my perspective in the public square. Similar to anti-communist crusaders in power in the 1950s, the new McCarthyites, in having gained some power in the government bureaucracy, are using their power to deny voice to those who disagree with them. If you disagree with me, fine. If you think that judges give up their right to express their opinion simply because they are members of the judiciary, then make your argument. If you feel that judicial independence should be sacrificed on the altar of political correctness, then marshal your facts. If you feel that the First Amendment does not protect the religious liberties of a judge, then state your case as to why. On each issue, make the best darn arguments you can, but don't seek to bludgeon me by name-calling, public shaming, and character assassination. Do not use the power of government to disenfranchise me because your worldview holds that public officials should be cleansed of any religious perspective. Perhaps this short speech is my shot across the Lexington Green. Why? Because I have a duty to discharge. We all have a duty to discharge. That duty is to those who came before us. And in the words of Thomas Paine, tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheaply, we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a price upon its goods, and would be strange indeed if so celestial an article of freedom should not be highly rated. Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigue of supporting it. My ancestors met stiff opposition when they came to the Oregon country in 1845. The terrain, hostile weather, British fur trappers, tragic accidents, sickness, death. But they did not shrink back from the hardships. They engaged the opposition in whatever form it took and chiseled out communities in harsh frontier lands. They became territorial legislators, county judges, postmasters, miners, and community leaders. They exercised their natural right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness without government interference. By their actions, they left us a legacy to follow in the cause of liberty. It is as if we are standing in the presence of the past, as if a great cloud of witnesses watches from a different realm, wondering if we will take up the charge to be great Americans. It really is time to stand up and say enough. Thank you very much.